The rise of Donald Trump to President of the United States has been one of the most unique and contentious events in the nation's history. Fraught with controversy, scandal, and spectacle, the figure early politicians dismissed as a joke has risen to become the leader of the democratic world. Attempting to comprehend Trump, his place in history, and the ultimate nature of his politics has been one of the challenges of our time. In this video, we'll recount the narrative that has unfolded over the past years in the United States. We'll explore the resentment that led to the rise of Trump, the different ways of interpreting him, and the transformation he's brought to the country. We'll explore the psychology of Trump himself, the sources of his ethics, values, and worldview. We'll explore how critics interpret Trump, and how his movement fits into historical cycles of civilization. We'll explore Trump's antipole, the insurgent candidate of the left, Bernie Sanders, and examine how the two help elucidate the developments of our time period. We'll look at images that define the Trump era, and conclude by exploring how his political victory constitutes a moral revolution. A central conflict in understanding Trump is navigating the partisan divide of our time period. To do so requires understanding the idea of moral categories of belief. Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist, wanted to understand the conflict between liberals and conservatives in society. A lifelong Democrat, he felt the Democrats presented better policies and brought higher economic growth, causing him to struggle to understand why others voted Republican. Not wanting to dismiss the beliefs of half the country, he wanted to explore why the country was divided into two different moral universes. In his book, The Righteous Mind, Haidt presented a thesis trying to explain the division of the modern world into two separate minds. Recalling our evolutionary origins, Haidt suggested that tribes divided into two systems of morality for the benefit of society. Half the population embraced care-based morality, while the other embraced conservative morality. Doing so had utility. Those with care-based morality focused on internal development, focusing on education, healing, and assimilation by the tribe. Meanwhile, those with conservative morality focused outwardly on order, policing, and war. Administering a series of surveys, Haidt built a data set he extrapolated from. He divided what people valued into a system of categories. Using the analogy of the 5 taste buds, he identified man's moral spheres as those of care, fairness, in-group loyalty, respect for authority, and purity. Those with care-based morality valued care and fairness, while those with conservative morality valued all 5. Haidt observed that loyalty, authority, and purity did not exist as moral concepts for liberals. Meanwhile, conservatives, understanding all 5 spheres, understood care and fairness, but were viewed as deficient in care for others by liberals. If we apply this knowledge, we can use it to comprehend the events of our time. Seeking impartial analysis, unclouded by partisanship, we can try to garner a balanced perspective. In this video, our goal will be to understand what's happened in the United States from the perspective of both systems of morality. Understanding the politics of the last years requires an understanding of resentment. Trumpism and its related sects, the Sanders movement and the equity movement, are expressions of resentment in American society. Psychologically different from envy, though related, resentment distinguishes itself by deriving from objective injury. Resentment is unique, as it's a negative emotion that derives from actual injustice. While resentment can appear in individuals, when it manifests on a nationwide scale, it has serious consequences. In Germany in the 1930s, after the Depression, extortive reparations payments, and being blamed for the First World War, the German system led to the rise of Hitler. Consequently, we can expect resentment in the United States would lead to a major social transformation. To understand the anger that's developed in the United States requires understanding the American social contract. Social contracts are unspoken agreements between a government and its people. In them, the people agree to observe certain precepts, while the government agrees to deliver on others. Hardworking, industrious, and loyal, the American people rarely dissent against the government. As a cultural value, this stands in contrast to other countries like France, where frequent dissent is a part of its politics. However, Americans hold an economic expectation about the government, expecting economic growth and a gradual increase in the standard of living over the generations. Delivering this, the government is rewarded with the public's loyalty. We can understand this social contract as the American dream. It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. George Carlin. Optimistic, individualistic, and exceptionalist, Americans accept imperfection as long as there is overall fairness to the system. In recent years, intergenerational mobility, the ability to rise to a higher social class than your parents, has diminished compared to prior time periods. While previous generations expected by default to make a higher income than their parents, today this is not the case. Housing has become unaffordable, rising from 15% of the median income to 30%. Increasingly inaccessible, the public faces delays in marriage and household formation. As the American dream increasingly becomes an experience of outliers rather than the majority, resentment develops. This resentment then manifests in the insurgent politics that define the post-Obama period. Thanks, Obama. To understand the turmoil of the last years requires going back to the Obama presidency. Elected in 2008 on a platform of hope and change, Barack Obama entered office on a wave of optimism, representing a stark departure from the policies of the Bush administration. Fitting the archetype of a visionary leader, he came into office with universal support and a supermajority in Congress. He subsequently navigated the subprime mortgage crisis, a collapse of the auto industry, the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and a reform of the American healthcare system. Despite this, enthusiasm for him slowly eroded amongst his supporters, who felt he didn't live up to the vision of his campaign. They concluded he either did not believe in the vision he professed in 2008 or lacked the assertiveness to pursue it. Soon after his election, he was given an award from the marketing industry for the best marketing of a campaign in history. He was also given a Nobel Prize less than a year into his presidency, receiving it before implementing the vision he promised in his campaign. Though Obama navigated the era's crises, under the surface, the American system required fundamental change. Understanding this led the public to elect him enthusiastically in 2008. One of the desires of Obama's supporters was him addressing the growing issue of wealth inequality in the United States. While it had been increasing since the 1980s, it was alleviated by the general prosperity of the 1990s, before being aggravated again by the Great Recession and the tax cuts made by the Bush administration. Anger against the bankers who crashed the economy led to the Occupy Wall Street movement, unique in modern American politics for being a protest that had a class-based origin. Forming encampments outside of the commercial banks who caused the recession, Obama responded not in solidarity, but sent in federal forces to dismantle the encampments. In 2012, Obama met with the leaders of the major commercial banks. He told that he had shielded them from the wrath of the public for causing the economic crisis. In exchange, he wanted their support in his campaign for re-election. Progressives hoped after the election, Obama would turn on his donors after they had exhausted their usefulness to him. Disappointment resulted when his second term proceeded and this did not happen. Late in his presidency, Obama began to speak about the growing issue of wealth inequality. His speeches showed he understood the issue, but was too meek to act on it. While Obama restored order and kept the American system functioning, he failed to be accountable to the country as a whole. Most accountable to his donors, he disappointed the bottom 40% of Americans, those earning the median income or less. The ultimate legacy of Obama is disappointment. Despite portraying himself as a visionary leader, he governed the country according to status quo principles. His unspecific ideas of hope and change were appealing, but from the beginning revealed the nature of his politics. His failure led to the feelings of resentment that gave birth to Trumpism. Chapter 1. Trump. In 1946, Donald Trump was born in Queens, New York. He was born to Fred and Mary Ann Trump and had 4 siblings. Fred Trump, his father, was a real estate developer at the time of his son's birth, owning a portfolio of over 5,000 homes or apartment units. After having behavior issues in school, his father sent Donald to military school to teach him structure and discipline. Trump recounted later how he prospered there, viewing it as a positive experience. After graduating, he attended business school and received a bachelor's in economics before entering the real estate business for himself. Given a small loan of $1 million, he departed from his father and began his own enterprise. Focused on development in Atlantic City, he built a successful casino, the Trump Plaza and Hotel. Ambitious, he followed this project with a grander one, constructing another casino, the Trump Taj Mahal. Yet with the gambling market saturated, there simply wasn't enough demand to justify the scale of the casino. As its debits accumulated into bankruptcy, Trump's father Fred came to the casino to bail him out. Purchasing $9 million in chips, he then left the casino, giving his son the equivalent of an emergency loan. Unsuccessful in business, Trump turned to entertainment. In 1987, his book The Art of the Deal was published, ghostwritten by Anthony Schwartz. The book created Trump's mythology and expressed his personal business philosophy. Trump then developed his own reality television show, finding success as an entertainer. His show The Apprentice portrayed him as a savvy businessman, judging a set of contestants who competed to be his protege. The show's iconic line consisted of Trump telling his apprentices they were fired, him judging if they had failed in their contests of fitness. Comfortable with tabloid journalism, Trump embraced its gore and sensationalism to promote his brand, business, and image. The Trump brand expanded to sell steaks, wine, and even opened its own university. In the 80s and 90s, Trump flirted with politics, joining Ross Perot's Reform Party, which was competing on the national scale in the United States. Venturing into this domain, Trump then withdrew before his second entrance to politics in 2016. The largest influence on Trump was his father, Fred Trump, a real estate developer. He took advantage of government grants made after World War II to subsidize affordable housing. At the time of his death, he had expanded his original 5,000-home portfolio to include ownership of 5 major apartment complexes. Frederick Trump embraced a 20th century ethic of social Darwinism, viewing life as a survival of the fittest. Accepting unscrupulousness as a part of business, he inculcated his value system into his children. For Fred, love was conditional, a product of whether his children could prove their fitness in the world of business. Frederick Trump had the largest impact on his eldest son and namesake, Fred Jr. Originally intended to inherit the family business, he disappointed his father by becoming a commercial pilot instead. The symbolism of flight suggests the lifetime of stress he was under from his father. To manage stress, Fred Jr. turned to alcohol, using it as a way to pacify himself. Over time, his drinking progressed until he died of cirrhosis. The trauma of this had a major effect on his brother, with Donald saying his death was the reason for his teetotaling or refusal to drink alcohol. As we said, the most famous anecdote from Trump's life with his father was that of Fred coming to the Trump Taj Mahal to make his emergency bailout. This event forever changed his view of his son, Fred concluding his son was fundamentally incapable at business. Trump internalized the ethics of his father, though simplified his social Darwinism into a new concept of winners and losers. Yet Fred's conditional love was what had the largest impact on his son. Never winning his father's affection in his lifetime, Trump was instilled with a desire to prove himself. We can view this as a defining aspect of his desire to become president. In office, most presidents gray. Even young-looking presidents, like Bill Clinton and Obama, noticeably gray after serving in the Oval Office. Causes are the constant stress of the job and being morally responsible for so many people. Unlike his predecessors, Trump has not shown the characteristic graying that accompanies office. Despite a near-constant barrage of media criticism against him, he's demonstrated an ability to deflect and refuse to internalize criticism of himself. Something that's elicited incredulity from observers is Trump's sincere desire to name centers, programs, and naval vessels after himself. While related to his tradition of shameless self-promotion, it's also an expression of his narcissism. Defined as a personality disorder, narcissism develops from a life of privilege, or from a desire to compensate for feelings of inferiority. While narcissism can manifest in malignant or pathological forms, it also has utility for a public figure as a source of motivation and resilience. Narcissists are certain of their uniqueness and excellence, and in their self-belief, have the ability to inspire and motivate others. With shameless self-belief and resilience to criticism, Trump's narcissism has been one of his most valuable political assets. Other than his father, another figure who had a major impact on Trump was the Manhattan attorney Ray Cohn. After representing Trump in a legal case, he evolved into one of his mentors and business partners. Cohn was focused on power and its consequences. He concluded taking responsibility or admitting faults brought no intrinsic benefits. Instead, he advised Trump to become amoral, never admitting fault, even if it meant the overt denial of truth. When attacked legally or personally, he advised Trump never to go on the defensive, but to continually attack his opponents. We see Cohn's influence in Trump's relationship with the media, never accepting criticism or admitting wrongdoing. We see its influence on Trump's psychology, a lack of virtue, creating a struggle for identity and coherent belief. Prior to his campaign for president, Trump was invited to attend the White House Correspondents' Dinner for the Obama administration. There, Obama delivered a speech where he belittled Trump and his ambition to run for president. He emphasized Trump's inexperience and suggested a reality TV star could never be president. Witnesses said the event had a major impact on Trump, humiliating him and becoming one of the core motivators for him during his campaign. Trump's politics is based on resentment. We see it both as a motivating principle for Trump himself, as well as being the origin for Trumpism in the public consciousness. At the same time, if we unpack Trump's personal politics, it expresses other elements. A reality TV star, Trump rose to celebrity with his show The Apprentice. With himself as the central focus, the show built his image, portraying him as a tough, decisive leader, and cultivating a persona for him amidst his future base. With his comfort with tabloid journalism and gossip columns, Trump knew gore and sensationalism were opportunities to promote himself. This led to his central political innovation: politics as entertainment. While Trump completed the process, American politics had been drifting in this direction for decades. Since the time of Bill Clinton's oral sex scandal and subsequent impeachment, American politics had become based more on spectacle than legislative vision. Politics as entertainment appeased the short attention spans of Americans and fulfilled a desire for purpose and meaning, finding meaning in the narrative expressed in political theater. One of the unique opportunities of our time has been to watch the political evolution of Trump. Trump is a showman who learned to become a politician. Usually the path of leaders follows the opposite direction, legislators learning over time to be charismatic speakers. Trump's unclear, unspecific beliefs allowed him to develop his political philosophy over time. He's gradually developed policies for economics, the military, and foreign policy. Trump represents a reassertion of the masculine element in American politics. Diplomatically, he's achieved rapport with dictators, recognizing their legitimacy on the world stage. He's moved away from the messianic policy of the Fukuyama period, of the end of history, and re-recognized that the United States is a selfish power on the world stage. He's renamed the Department of Defense to War, to remove euphemistic language about the use of power. He's reasserted America's imperial interests, encouraging Europeans to invest more in defense, after enjoying the peace dividend for years. He's implemented tariffs to protect American labor from foreign competition. Trump's masculine politics embodies the ideal of the white working class men he represents, favoring self-reliance, individualism, and the imperial principle. Their values are being reasserted on the world stage. In 1828, America was filled with alarm as a new kind of figure rose to President of the United States. With the generation of the founders gone, leadership of the country passed to a new generation. A frontiersman, Andrew Jackson was a general who led campaigns against the Seminole in Florida, and during the War of 1812, defeated the British at the Battle of New Orleans. Achieving celebrity, his supporters in the Democratic Party pushed for him to become president. Jackson represented a shift in American politics. While prior to him suffrage was concentrated in the hands of the landed, in his age of populism, voting expanded to all white men, including those without land. This shifted power in the United States away from landholders and toward the common citizen. Critics feared Jackson would be a demagogue, and with popular support, proclaim himself monarch. This did not occur, and Jackson observed the two-term precedent set by Washington, respecting its hallowedness as a tradition set by the father of the country. We can view this as a mature expression of masculinity, the understanding of when to step down from power. Carrying out the popular will, Jackson killed the Bank of the United States, which was believed to only serve the interests of elite bondholders. His most controversial act was firing all executive branch officials when he came into office, replacing them with loyalists instead. Controversial at the time, it became a staple of American politics. Busts of Jackson have appeared beside Trump, showing that his followers recognize he represents a similar principle. Though a billionaire in his values and education, he represents the white working class. Like Jackson, he represents a populist takeover of government. Critics of Trump have expressed disbelief at the devotion he enjoys from his followers. Trump even expressed the same incredulity, remarking he could walk in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and not lose any voters. Critics observed his followers were even willing to attack the constitutional system if that was what Trump wanted. While compared to cults, his support represents a form of religion existing in human psychology. Sir James Frazer was a Victorian anthropologist and mythologist. He specialized in the study of primitive religions. In his inquiries, he discovered a trope that appeared in those he studied. It was a death-rebirth religion intended to restore prosperity to a civilization, a kind of universal religion deriving from the unconscious. In it, tribes would literally sacrifice weak or infertile kings and replace them with fertile ones. This happened in times of stagnation to promote revival. Even critics recognize Trump's boundless energy and enthusiasm. He survived COVID, an assassination attempt, climbed 58 flights of stairs in his 70s, and avoided the cognitive decline of his peers like Joe Biden. In the framework of Frazerism, or the unconscious religion, Trumpism represents a revival of a vitalistic masculine principle. One of the challenges of Trumpism has been categorizing it. Though today it rules the Republican Party, it began as an insurgent sect within it. After dueling challengers throughout the primary, Trump entertained conservatives, while proving himself the fittest and most assertive of the candidates. If compared to the Bush administration that preceded him, Trump reversed several Republican orthodoxies. Trump rejected unfettered immigration, immigrants competing with Americans for work and reducing wages. He embraced protectionism, using tariffs to protect American workers from being outcompeted by foreign competition. In these ways, he represents a nationalist shift in conservative politics. Consistent with a phenomenon occurring throughout the West, he fits a pattern of rightist movements rising elsewhere, such as in Italy and Hungary. He flirts with authoritarianism and monarchism, representing a shift of power in the American system toward the executive branch. Critics have interpreted his policies as fascism, fascist adjacent, or alt-right. If we compare Trump's movement with European fascism, it shares several similarities. In 2020, crowds assailed voting centers, recalling Mussolini's black shirts, using intimidation to suppress rival parties. Trump's mendaciousness has been compared to propaganda figures like Joseph Goebbels. Meanwhile, the attack on the Capitol recalls Mussolini's March on Rome or Hitler's beer hall putsch. The goals of Trump's movement began as nebulous and unspecific, recalling the ambiguity of Hitler's National Socialism. Ultimately, the most similar governments in history to Trump's would be those of Bismarck and Hitler in Germany, his movement being an expression of revolutionary conservatism. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're sending people with lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with them. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. Donald Trump. One of Trump's unique traits is his manner of speech. When speaking, he often contradicts himself mid-sentence, in some cases completely reversing his initial statement. Politically, this creates ambiguity about his beliefs. It allows him to flirt with authoritarianism without committing to it. It allows his followers and critics to interpret him in different ways. However, this is not a performance, but is done naturally by Trump, showing the effect Roy Cohn had on his psychology. We can understand Trump's speech as a kind of doublespeak. It allows him to express contradictory ideas simultaneously. You will never take back our country with weakness. You have to be strong. We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you. And I know everyone here will be marching down to Congress to make our voices heard. Peacefully, peacefully, Donald Trump. The best example of Trump's doublespeak came on January 6, 2020, when he inspired an attack on the Capitol during the presidential transition of power. In 2020, rather than accept defeat, Trump was the first candidate in American history to reject the peaceful transition of power. Prior to January 6, he repeated a narrative the election was rigged against him, affirming a conspiracy to his supporters. While on January 6th he counseled a peaceful demonstration, the emotion of the mob and the context in which the speech was given gave it a double meaning. His speech recalls Mark Antony's after the death of Caesar, immortalized in the work of Shakespeare. On the surface, Mark Antony called for peace. However, the context in which he spoke inspired a mob to attack the conspirators who assassinated Caesar. Like the two-faced god of January, January 6 can be interpreted in different ways. If it was a fascistic attempt to seize power, It lacked this as a clear purpose and goal. The attack could have escalated rapidly and caused a general crisis, but the Capitol Police evacuated congressmen before they could encounter the insurrectionists. The mob defiled the sacredness of the building. At the same time, as an act of populism, they were storming into a body that represented them. Other than disrupting the transfer of power to Joe Biden, they attacked Trump's own vice president, whose job was to swear in the next president. The mob included armed militants alongside comic figures like the QAnon shaman. While it began as a break-in into the building, later supporters walked through the building placidly, as if they were on a tour. Insurrectionists broke into Nancy Pelosi's office, one having a photo taken of him, with his feet on her desk. The attack on police resulted in violence, resulting in a woman's death. I say it this way: when you're born in this world, you're given a ticket to the freak show. And when you're born in America, you're given a front row seat. George Carlin. The culminating image of January 6th was that of the Trump shaman taking control of the seat of the chair of the Senate. He symbolized how the event was a confused, surreal expression of the complexities of human consciousness. The event was both an expression of populism, the people disrupting their own legislature, as well as an act of authoritarianism, a mob wanting power to remain in the hands of the executive. If we recall the tenets of Trump's psychology we explored earlier, we can conclude he actually believed in his own conspiracy. Unable to admit defeat due to his father's social Darwinism, we can interpret the day as ultimately an expression of Trump's narcissism. One of the puzzling parts of the American system for outsiders is that the president is not chosen by popular vote. Instead, a contrivance of the founding fathers, the Electoral College, elects him instead. In modern history, the Electoral College has resulted in two candidates becoming president while losing the popular vote: Bush Jr. in his election against Al Gore, and Trump against Hillary Clinton in his first election. The purpose of the Electoral College was to transfer power from the coastal populous regions to the less populous states, ensuring the rural center of the country was not neglected and the country as a whole was represented. At the same time, the Electoral College has been one of the most controversial elements of the American Constitution, as it's literally undemocratic and overrides the popular will. One of its greatest critics was Andrew Jackson, who was kept from the presidency due to his opponent's exploitation of it. Reviewing the elections of 2016, 2020, and 2024 provide us with insights into Trumpism. As we said, in 2016, Trump became president while losing the popular vote nationwide, winning a majority of states. Central to his victory were around 10,000 working-class men in Michigan, who defected to his side over the Democrats. However, winning an election while losing the popular vote means a president enters office with a lack of legitimacy, with most Americans opposing them. In 2020, a surge in voter turnout resulted in Trump's ouster from government and the more normative administration of Joe Biden entering office. We can interpret this as the electorate rejecting Trump's flirtation with fascist principles. Not discarding him, however, they demanded a reform of his politics. After 4 years in the wilderness, he returned to politics with a new, mainstreamized version of Trumpism. If we review the three elections, we can see Trump's base of support increasing with each one, showing his increasing growth in political legitimacy. He retained a constant base of around 74 million people. Even if defeated, they remained loyal to him. In 2024, Trump won the popular vote against his rival, Kamala Harris, winning this in the states for the first time he entered office with popular acceptance. If we review the 2020 election as an exile period, we see how the American public is able to discipline a president who behaves inappropriately. Rejected and admonished by the public, Trump returned to politics in 2024, representing a moderated or mainstreamized Trumpism. Chapter 2, Sanders. A rising tide should lift all boats. Ronald Reagan. Having explored the idea of the American social contract, an essential element to unpack is the rise of wealth inequality in the United States. While one of the themes of the 20th century was the conflict between capital and labor, in the 21st century we've ceased to speak in these terms. When Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1932, he ran on a platform called the New Deal, a new social contract between the forces of capital and labor in the United States. Preserving capitalism in the United States, Roosevelt also worked to make the system more egalitarian. The legacy of this was the prosperity of the 1950s, the post-war United States, enjoying its period of greatest affluence and equality in the nation's history. Over the decades, the system eroded until distributions in wealth gradually returned to those of the 1920s. In trying to find a source for resentment in society, we can conclude it has an economic origin. In 2013, the French economist Thomas Piketty published a book called Capital in the 21st Century. Beginning the book with a simple formula, R is greater than G, he identified the mathematical principle that created inequality. When the return on assets R exceeds the growth of the economy G, inequality develops. Due to the nature of compound interest, over time the situation worsens if the government doesn't intervene in the economy. In a previous video, we explored the idea of the American aristocracy. We explained that once the appreciation on one's assets is large enough to replace their income, one becomes a member of the American aristocracy. As the American system serves asset owners, we emphasize the importance of entering this class as fast as possible, living frugally to maximize savings, and investing in the stock market. Unlike the hereditary aristocracies of the past, the American aristocracy is fairer as it's universally accessible, based solely on wealth. However, due to the high cost of living, barriers to entry increase as the economy matures. The rent is too damn high. The largest expense for individuals is housing. In an ideal situation, housing is affordable and makes up 15% of the median income. This was the case in the 1950s, during the post-war boom in the United States. Today, that number has doubled, with housing now making up 30% of the median income. If we want to think of this in alternative terms, we can interpret it as an extra tax levied on part of the population. If 1/3 of Americans are renters, they're paying an additional 15% in tax, though not to the government but private asset owners. One interpretation of this is neo-manorialism. We can define healthy housing as 15% of income, manorialism as 30%, and serfdom as 50%, while figures like Trump would oppose direct efforts to reduce inequality. An alternative is to reduce the cost of housing. Ironically, as a real estate developer, this would be an area Trump would have knowledge in. Trump's counterpart in the Democratic Party was the 2016 insurgent candidate of the left, Bernie Sanders. Like Trump, he found the most support amongst the white working class, though mostly those concentrated at northern latitudes. A democratic socialist, Sanders came from a working-class family in Brooklyn, New York, and saw firsthand the economics of suffering. Recalling Roosevelt, in 2016 he presented a vision of a universalist class-based politics for the United States. He emphasized the divergence in wealth that had grown between what he called the 99% of society and the top 1% or billionaires. In our time, the most influential figures are the founders of our major corporations: Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, and Bill Gates of Microsoft. Like the 19th century titans of industry, they become the Rockefellers of our time period. The challenge of Sanders' movement was articulating the invisibility of egregious wealth. With their assets consisting of shares in companies, the true scale of billionaire fortunes is incomprehensible. If we compare the net worths of the public with those of billionaires, we find evidence of the idea of neo-manorialism. while most live at the level of subsistence with insecure access to housing. A small elite monopolize ownership of most assets in society. The struggle for Sanders was communicating his beliefs to the American people, stigmatizing the word socialism. Americans feared that if embraced, it would lead the United States to turn into a failed state like Venezuela. A recurring theme is that when bourgeois societies enter times of crisis, they shift right rather than left. We see the best example of this in Germany in the 1930s, which pivoted toward National Socialism after the Depression. In times of crisis, middle classes become defensive of their assets, seeking to secure their property rather than seek redistribution. The opposite happens in proletarian societies, like China and Russia. In countries without middle classes, society pivots left, as the public has nothing to lose and everything to gain from redistribution. Defeated electorally, a central lesson of the Sanders era is Americans' rejection of class consciousness. While this concept is a key part of politics in places like France and Latin America, socialism remains fundamentally rejected by Americans. To Americans, wealth is not finite, and the accumulation of wealth by individuals is a product of fitness rather than a mathematical result like that described by Piketty. Americans reject the idea that the owners of capital have a moral obligation to the rest of society. Yet as inequality increases, so does suffering, revealing the central contradiction in the American consciousness, its inability to understand government's role to discipline capital. One of the key protagonists of 21st century American politics is the donor class of the Democratic Party. While labeled as a liberal elite from media like Fox News, another term for them as a group is a professional managerial class, a term coined by the writer Barbara Ehrenreich. Ehrenreich wanted to find a label for a specific generation of people, those born after the Second World War, and who enjoyed an unprecedented set of economic and social advantages compared to the rest of American history. Growing up in an egalitarian, prospering, and peaceful post-war era, they had ready access to affordable advanced education and were able to enter professional or managerial roles without impediments. This class assumed roles in media and politics, assuming positions in academia, journalism, and the leadership of the Democratic Party. Though diverse like all generations, they shared a distinct set of moral beliefs, which had a major impact on society. Guilt is an important force of human psychology. As social animals, humans want to believe they exist in just relationships with others. In particular, those with care-based morality suffer adversity when trying to rationalize their advantages, while those with conservative morality justify their fortune through the ideas of personal fitness or God's providence. Those with care-based morality struggle with it. Even if they ignore it, it rises from the subconscious, creating inner turmoil and cognitive dissonance. Seeking to resolve it, they create narratives to justify themselves in a moral universe. Assuming their own moral rectitude, they turn their feelings of guilt into blame and project them onto society as a whole. Here is one of the core themes of the 21st century, and the resentment that led to the overthrow of the liberal order, rather than accept responsibility for the inequality that had eroded the American dream. Instead, the managerial class revived past traumas of race and identity and projected them on the working class. It is easy to tear down statues, hard to build them. In the post-Obama era, the left divided into two branches. One was Sanders' class-based universalism, while the other was the equity movement. Two academics, Ibram Kendi and Robin DiAngelo, were the main sources for the equity movement, becoming well-paid speakers and consultants. Their works were celebrated by the Democratic donor class, with their ideas incorporated into corporate seminars and teacher trainings. Though the words equality and equity are similar, they represent different forms of justice. Equality represents an even playing field, where all participants in an arena are treated the same. Equity rejects an equal playing field as immoral, recognizing that individuals enter a contest coming from different unfairnesses or disadvantages. Seeking justice, equity supports an external power's intervention to grant benefits or subsidies to those who are perceived to be suffering from deficits. The problem with equity is it disrupts natural outcomes, creating artificial ones that can only be sustained by continual intervention. By disrupting the results of naturally unfolding processes, it creates new injustices, which amplifies resentment in society rather than pacifying it. The equity movement is a logical culmination of the moral belief system adopted by the left in the 20th century, who assumed there were no innate differences between individuals. Expanding justice for minority groups and women. After achieving equality, the expectation was that economic and social outcomes would match ratios of sex and race in society. Though America had become a post-racial society, because outcomes did not portray equality, the only logical conclusion was the society remained systemically racist. However, racism had become insidious and hard to detect. This resulted in the coining of new terms, like microaggression and implicit bias. Kendi and D'Angelo argued that even if an individual fully subscribed to tolerance, unconscious forces meant they were fundamentally prejudiced. Having descended to the level of the unconscious, they achieved a moral standard which was impossible for society to fulfill. One interpretation is that the equity movement is a religion. This perspective was explored by John McWhorter in his book on the woke religion. With the end of Christian practice in America in the 1990s, the religious impulse shifted into politics, manifesting the masculinity cult that developed around Trump, and the equity religion. Expressing Manichaean principles, equityism recalls the intolerant Christian sects of the Reformation, like the aniconic sects who wanted to destroy icons of the past. The equity movement literally tore down old monuments of Western civilization. Like Christianity, the movement embraced victimhood and the vindication of victimhood as the highest principles. Like Christianity, it elevated a class of secular saints it viewed as martyrs. Wanting to transform civilization, it supported hiring practices based explicitly on the sex or race of an individual, including a priesthood of diversity officers, characterized by the right as political commissars. During the Trump era, it tried to enforce its belief system by a long march through the institutions. Rejecting texts based on the race or sex of their author, they sought to replace them with a new literature. Despite its professed tolerance, the movement refused debate, instead preferring ad hominem or personal attacks, dismissing its critics with labels like sexist or racist. Concealing itself behind academic language, the equity movement was fundamentally about a redistribution of power and resources in society, though not the humanist, universalist objective of Sanders. It was based on a politics of grievance. While Kendi and D'Angelo thought their discoveries constituted a moral revolution, they simply rediscovered racism and sexism from an alternate perspective. The legacy of the equity movement is its divisiveness. The movement amplified grievances rather than pacify them. It emphasized differences rather than try to overcome them. In disrupting natural outcomes, it increased injustice in society and inflamed more resentment. Though Trump's movement triumphed in 2024, the equity movement today continues to impact the American consciousness. Evidence suggests a conspiracy in the Democratic Party to prevent Sanders from succeeding in the 2016 primary. Leaked emails by the Democratic National Committee show that its chair and higher leadership were complicit in these efforts. Despite being called the Democratic Party, the Democrats actually had the least democratic process for choosing their national candidate. Rather than a popular vote, party elites formed a consensus and chose a candidate. In 2016, this was most egregious with the existence of superdelegates, who from the beginning were pledged to Hillary Clinton in a supermajority. Slogans like "It's her turn" affirmed the party's selection of Clinton before getting to the actual voters. Even Trump, despite his ideological hostility, acknowledged the Democrats' sabotage of Sanders in tweets and public statements. An important event for Sanders came during a speech he gave in Seattle, Washington. Addressing a crowd, 2 equity rights activists surged onto the stage, displacing him and stealing his microphone. Sanders stood down to let them speak, though some in the crowd protested an act they saw as disrespectful and arrogant. A speculation is this was an AstroTurf event, an event arranged by fixers in the Democratic Party to sabotage Sanders. Despite marching in person with Martin Luther King, Sanders was subject to the same accusations of racism for trying to prevent the disruption of his own event. Symbolically, this event portrayed how Sanders' movement was compromised from its vision of class-based universalism. It symbolized how identity politics grievances divided the left and prevented them from forming a functional political coalition. During the time of his most promising point in the 2016 primary, Sanders' team arranged a lectern for him to speak from that emulated that of the President of the United States. Coming to speak from it, Sanders was able to present himself as how he would comport himself as president. Yet as the primary unfolded and it became clear Clinton would be the national nominee, this became a lost image of an alternate history. Ultimately, Sanders presented the most sober response to the rise of popular anger and resentment in the United States. Humane and demonstrating an emotional maturity that exceeded his opponents. He never forgot the experiences of his father, who worked in Brooklyn as a paint salesman and laborer. While as president, Sanders may not have been able to legislate, if given command of the system of executive orders for 4 years. He could have fundamentally changed the internal dynamics of the United States, taking action where Obama did not. He could have used federal power in a manner recalling Franklin Roosevelt. Yet rather than rise to be the essential figure of the left, Sanders was discarded for less capable candidates. Chapter 3. Analysis. If we invoke examples from history, we can use them to understand the political developments of the past years in the United States. We can invoke the writings of Sir John Glubb, the events of the late Roman Republic, and the works of the Greek philosophers to gain insight into our time. Sir John Glubb was a British military officer who lived through the time of decolonization and the voluntary dismantling of the British Empire. An amateur historian and writer, his experiences caused him to develop a theory of the cycle of empire. Formulated into a thesis, he argued that civilizations pass through 6 stages as they rise from obscurity to greatness before descending back into insignificance. He observed a pattern where great empires have a lifespan of approximately 250 years. If a generation lasted 25 years, he concluded this cycle proceeded across 10 generations. Glubb argued civilizations went through 6 stages: an outburst or pioneer stage, an age of conquest or war, an age of commerce or trade, an age of affluence, an age of intellect and aesthetics, and finally an age of decadence which preceded collapse. Central to his thesis was a psychology of hardship, that hard times produce excellence, while ease produces unfitness. Hardship promotes duty, resilience, and self-denial, virtues that benefit the community. Meanwhile, ease produced ignorance, selfishness, and the pursuit of short-term pleasure, virtues which, if embraced on a mass scale, eventually resulted in ruin. In this way, Glubb embraced an ancient Greek idea that character is destiny. Empires that do not collapse at the end of their 250-year period go through a process of transformation. We see this in Rome in its transition from republic to empire. An argument is that as a republic matures, its leadership grows wealthy, incompetent, and disconnected from the experiences of the citizenry, creating resentment. Glubb emphasized other factors, including an increase of individualism and internal competition, as opposed to social solidarity, a decline of religious belief, a rejection of military service, and a rise of excessive welfarism. He argued immigration and increasing internal diversity caused disorder, as the empire had to adapt to integrate new ethnicities and cultures. Using Rome as an example, his thesis was that a mature republic transitions toward monarchy to keep the system stable and maintain order. If we take 1776 as the birth of the United States, in 2026 we've reached 250 years and entered the time of decline described by Glubb. Appropriately, we live in a time of the death of religion, the rise of life comparison apps, social atomization, mass shootings, mass obesity, disdain for military service, a rise of subliteracy, the non-function of Congress, and the rise of wealth inequality. These issues suggest we've entered the last phase of Glubb's cycle of empire. With America still a hegemon on the world stage, Glubb's thesis suggests the United States is in a transitional era. With this as our basis, we can unpack how developments in the United States mirror Rome's transition from republic to empire. The beasts that roam over Italy have a cave or lair to lie in, but the men who fight and die for Italy have nothing but the air and the light. Tiberius Gracchus. In the age of Caesar, Rome divided into two factions, the Optimates and Caesarians. The Optimates were the defenders of the old order. Senators, they stood by the institutions of the Republic and sought to protect them. Meanwhile, the Caesarians sought a radical transformation of Rome, installing Julius Caesar as dictator. The division of Rome arose from resentment that had been building in the Republic for decades. Though it had defeated its arch-rival Carthage, the fruits of Rome's success were unevenly distributed. Rome's elite, the patricians, used their newfound wealth to buy up land in Italy, which had formerly been owned by smallholders. This displaced the prior system of small landowning farmers and created a new system dividing the Republic between landowners and tenants. Interpreting Caesar results in two views of him. While the Optimates wanted to preserve the Republic's constitutional system, they were resented by the people as defenders of the economic status quo. Meanwhile, Caesarians wanted him to take power, destroy and remake the Republic, and establish economic and social justice. Believing Caesar was a tyrant, the Optimates conspired for his assassination. Yet after achieving this, the people turned on them, before they were defeated by Caesar's successors in the subsequent civil war. Rome's transition from republic to empire was a complex, muddled human narrative. Though Caesar possessed personal virtue, by centralizing power in one figure, later emperors like Nero and Caligula used the office to impose tyranny rather than justice. If we compare Rome to the American Republic, we see how the betrayal of the American dream and economic injustice leads to Caesarian politics. May none but wise and just men rule under this roof. John Adams. Both of the ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Plato, presented views of politics we can apply to the modern United States. Both counseled on the essentialness of virtue in maintaining healthy government. Aristotle divided government into three forms, ruled by the one, few, and many, and argued these could exist in healthy or pathological forms. This derived from the justice or injustice of those who occupied the highest offices. Meanwhile, Plato argued for the ideal form of government in his work, The Republic, using the analogy of the body, which was divided into the mind, heart, and body. He believed that a right relationship between the classes in society resulted in social health or harmony. In a just soul, reason ruled over the body with the aid of anger, and controlled passion or desire. In unjust souls, desire or anger dominated and overwhelmed reason, creating unhappiness and turmoil. Analogously, Plato divided society into three classes: the philosophers, retainers, and merchants. Plato argued that philosophers, those dedicated to the true good and beautiful, should govern with the aid of the retainers, who valued valor and order. Meanwhile, the merchants who pursued commerce and pleasure would make up the base of society. If we apply Plato's ethic to American government, we see the generation of the founders included philosopher presidents like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. Later generations elected war heroes like Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison, while in modern times the public has elected an actor, Ronald Reagan, and an entertainer, Donald Trump. As we said above with Glubb, civic virtue, duty, piety, and service have declined in the American consciousness, replaced instead by the virtues of celebrity, short-term pleasure, entertainment, and ignorance. Trump has faced vociferous criticism, both in the United States and throughout the West during his ascent to office. We can unpack interpretations of him using this critical lens. The people are turbulent and changing. They seldom judge or determine right. Alexander Hamilton, 1787. In 2006, Mike Judge, the creator of King of the Hill, made a comedy about the future of America called Idiocracy. In the film, Luke Wilson plays an average man from the 2000s who's frozen and wakes up in America 500 years later. Despite being an average man in 2006, in the future his character is the world's smartest man. The president, a reality TV star and heavyweight boxer, makes him his presidential advisor. There he makes bold reforms, like using water instead of Gatorade for agriculture. While other films show the technology, prosperity, and advancement of the future, Judge does the opposite. He explores how the trends visible in the 2000s predict a dystopian, not ideal, future. Despite being a comedy, the film made several accurate predictions, including an entertainer becoming president, the shortening of attention spans through technology, and the rise of subliteracy. To critics, the rise of Trump is the beginning of idiocracy, the rule of the least capable over society. They present his low education and ignorance of history, and his use of puerile nicknames for opponents, as proof that stupidity has triumphed over society. Beyond Judge, another figure who cautioned against the rise of buffoonery over society was Alexander Hamilton. Born on the remote island of Nevis in the Caribbean, Hamilton migrated to the United States, where he became an officer in the Continental Army. The childless George Washington viewed him as a son, and he became one of the founding fathers, writing several of the Federalist Papers. Rising to his aristocratic station through hard work and industry, he had a disdain for the mob he felt wouldn't know how to govern society. In private, he warned against the rise of cretinism, the rule of the worst people over society. With disregard for justice and nobility, politics would instead become entertainment rather than a source of governance. In the 19th century, American business magnates, like the Rockefellers, Carnegies, and Vanderbilts, amassed fortunes that were incomprehensible to the average person. Associated with the oil, steel, and rail industries, they became the country's first millionaires when the average wage was $1 a day. These magnates became the American noble families, and after enjoying such affluence, understood their fortunes, demanded they embrace the concept of civic virtue. Understanding they had a duty to society, they founded museums, libraries, and centers for the arts. They practiced the idea of noblesse oblige, the idea that the fortunate had an obligation of charity and service to humanity. The Trump family, associated with rooms made of gold, failed casinos, and a fake university, is considered a joke by their aristocratic peers, devoted only to wealth and shameless self-promotion. Their lack of learning, virtue, and ethics prevents them from being an aristocratic family. The Trumps are associated with schemes to redistribute wealth from the less sophisticated to themselves, the misuse of funds by charitable organizations, and running a non-credited university that ended in dissolution and bankruptcy. Trump never released his tax returns to the public, conscious that if released, they would destroy his reputation. Regular practice in real estate was to claim maximal depreciation to avoid paying taxes. With the ethic of Fred Trump, this is what Trump practiced. Meanwhile, when competing for the highest net worth in Fortune magazines, Trump would state the maximum net worth of his properties. Trump's father, Fred, transferred wealth using gifts, loans, and trusts, giving his son $700 million over his lifetime, while paying minimal taxes. To their peers who understand the concept of civic responsibility, the Trump brand is associated with ignorance and the vain pursuit of wealth, as opposed to an ethic of duty to humanity. No person holding office shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title from any king, prince, or foreign state. Constitution 198. One of the pillars of the American system is expressed in the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. The term emoluments is a broad term, referring not only to gifts, but any personal benefits gained from office. In its ideal form, the Emoluments Clause expresses a civic ideal for politicians not to personally benefit from serving in office. If we identify the net worths of politicians before and after entering office, these surge with their rise in celebrity, publications of books and paid speeches. Politicians are rewarded for the politics they held in office. For instance, Obama's press secretary Jay Carney, subsequently given a role as a union buster for Amazon. A second controversy is insider trading in Congress, or using non-public information, only known by the government, to gain an advantage in the stock market. Using publicly available data, we find that politicians achieve returns in the stock market that exceed Warren Buffett. On entering office, Trump transferred leadership of his real estate empire to his sons. However, as he rules a global brand, he benefits from the publicization of his name. The Constitution has mechanisms to discipline breakers of the Emoluments Clause. By impeaching a politician who behaved inappropriately, the system could be disciplined into following the clause. The problem with this system is it requires Congress to discipline itself. Democrats impeached Trump twice, but in neither instance was it over the Emoluments Clause. This suggests the accepted practice of benefiting from office. Embracing and enforcing the Emoluments Clause is a way to restore virtue to the Republic. If we observe the developments of the last years, a pattern is the gradual shift of power from Congress to the executive branch. The American system, divided between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, was designed by the founders to keep one part of government from dominating. The system distributed power across multiple branches to avoid the establishment of tyranny. Yet a challenge of the system is what happens if one branch becomes non-functional, with the country still needing it to fill its role. Here, gridlock in Congress has created this situation. With a non-functional Congress, America turns more into a federation like the European Union, as opposed to a unitary nation. In 1973, without Congress able to legislate on abortion, a Supreme Court case, Roe v. Wade, federally legalized abortion in the United States. This is an example of one branch fulfilling the role of another one. The executive branch has viewed an increasing use of executive orders to govern the country, recalling the royal fiats of kings in the Middle Ages. The United States sees its highest voter turnout for the presidential election. Busy with their everyday lives, Americans focus on electing the figure who has the largest influence on politics. The 4-year term allows them to hold a regular plebiscite on whether the executive is fit or not. If power continues to transfer to the presidency, the system will adapt into an elective monarchy, a paradoxical form of government. It might function with America's long-term values of liberty and the Bill of Rights. An elective monarchy recalls the rule of Napoleon over France, who declared himself emperor only after the public voted that he do so in a national plebiscite. It recalls Augustus in Rome, who became emperor over the Republic. The system would have to decide whether to retain Washington's 2-term limit or remove it. Removing it would make the country into an elective monarchy. Keeping it would maintain it as a form of republic. If we observe the ouster of Trump in 2020 and his replacement by Joe Biden, we see how the system would discipline a president who behaved inappropriately. Overall, we observe the transition of the American government toward this monarchic form of government over the last years. The idea of the imperial presidency occurs under Roosevelt, who in the late Victorian age had a unique temperament that made him effective as an executive. Fitting the masculine ethic, he had been an officer and police commissioner. A naturalist, he worked to preserve the natural beauty of the United States. A political realist, he advanced America's imperial objectives on the world stage. And finally, as a populist, he promoted the economic well-being of the lowest 40% of the United States. A figure who fits this archetype would be effective as an imperial ruler. Finally, the American system has been evolving toward dynasticism. As a society matures, wealth accumulates in the hands of a few families. In an unfettered system, these magnates trade leadership of the country amongst themselves. Affluent families include the Kennedys, Bushes, and Clintons. Overall, the non-function of Congress has led to a shift of power toward the executive, who through executive orders, like royal fiats, has gradually shifted the American system toward elective monarchy. If we review the politics of the past years, we can learn several lessons. We can discern how to take power in a democracy and why the Democratic Party struggles to do so. The rise of Trump provides a template for how to rise to leadership of the United States, and given its hegemonic role in the world leadership. Important in running for office is name recognition or pre-existing celebrity. From here, a candidate needs to build and maintain a consistent base. Trump has shown by maintaining a devoted following of 30% of the country, you can overcome and subsume the divided other parties. A national movement should transcend campaigning and present a moral system to govern or guide society. Once elected president, you preside not only over a population of 300 million, but leadership of NATO, an alliance system including Europe and Canada. You preside over an alliance system that includes South Korea and Japan, de facto control of an empire that spans the globe. This makes the American presidential election the most important global event every 4 years. One of the motivations of Jonathan Haidt in discovering the moral categories was to understand why Democrats lose elections. To him, Democrats offered more effective policies and higher economic growth, making it puzzling while they were defeated by Republicans. Analyzing the last years, we can discern the reasons why Democrats lose elections. The first cause is Democrats' understanding only care and fairness as moral principles. This puts them at a disadvantage to conservatives, who value in-group loyalty, respect for authority and purity, which is able to appeal to a wider base of interests. Liberal politicians succeed when they're paired with vision. The most successful left-wing politicians were transformative figures, fundamentally changing the American system. We see archetypes of this in Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt. While the Democrats have more enrolled voters, they have a consistently lower turnout compared to Republicans. Democratic voters come out when there's enthusiasm associated with visionary leaders. An ethic of masculinity is also neglected by the Democrats. By nature, care-based morality is focused more on cultivation, and thus the feminine principle. Nonetheless, when led by figures like Kennedy or Roosevelt, they rise to office. A final factor is coalition building, seeking moral certainty. Care-based morality rejects peers who come to different moral conclusions. We see the best example of this in history in the division of the left in the Spanish Civil War, where it divided between anarchists, communists, and Republicans, losing to the more unified right. We explored how, despite being called the Democratic Party, the party is the least democratic in choosing its national politicians. Other than the party selecting Clinton through superdelegates, it repeated this with Kamala Harris, running an appointed candidate, as opposed to the victor of a primary contest. Finally, the American left fractured in the post-Obama era between the class-based Sanders movement and identity politics. The equity movement increased division in society and alienated voters from the Democrats. By learning these lessons, the American left can formulate a coherent strategy to achieve national leadership. Chapter 4, Art. Andy Warhol, the American artist, was famous for his portraits of iconic American figures in the United States. Among the famous images he made were of Prince and Marilyn Monroe. As a child, Warhol grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and as a Slovak American, attended the Byzantine Catholic Church. Adorned with religious iconography, its style of art influenced him in adulthood. Andy Warhol would take pre-existing photographs of popular figures and transform them, in the process adding his own interpretation. If we review 3 secular icons or Warhola, we can discern what their meanings teach us about our generation and the politics of the Trump era. The most iconic image of the Trump era is this one, the Emperor. Faceless and in the image only with a protruding hand, Trump recalls historic figures like Augustus. Meanwhile, before the president are the governors of the provinces, the presidents are leaders of Italy, Holland, and NATO. The image recalls the tarot card The Emperor, portraying the themes of hegemony and masculinity. The most meaningful image to Trump himself is the mugshot taken of him during his exile period. After the attack on the Capitol, moral alarm spread throughout the United States. Educated Americans observed the event's similarity to the Reichstag fire that led to the rise of Hitler. Democrats with institutional power began to use it against the Trump movement. This included the director of the FBI, James Comey. Arrested for insurrection, Trump had his mugshot taken and was labeled a felon. It meant a felon running for president of the United States, an unprecedented event in the country's history. Turning it into an icon, he placed the image of him as a criminal on the wall to the entrance of the Oval Office. Critics were made to sit under it before meeting with him. A final image that portrays our era is this one. It is an image of Bernie Sanders, sitting alone in the winter during Joe Biden's inauguration for president. Underdressed, he huddles in the cold, and rather than be the center of attention, he sits anonymously in the crowd. He wears mittens sewed for him by a Vermont elementary school teacher, symbolizing his benignity and good. Naming it Sanders Sitting in the Cold, the image portrays America's rejection of Bernie Sanders and his vision for politics. Conclusion. George R.R. Martin said the story comes in the telling, and when I began writing, I allowed myself to come to conclusions through the process. Having reflected on the above, these are my conclusions. First, the rise of wealth inequality has resulted in the American dream becoming increasingly the experience of outliers as opposed to the majority. This leads to the rise of resentment and insurgent politics. In the Trump era, the American left divided between the class-based politics of Sanders and the equity movement, who were hostile to each other and were divided against the 30% of society who were consistently loyal to Trump. The system rejected Sanders, whose politics Americans find immoral. After several election cycles, the system has settled on Trump, who began as a neo-fascist figure, but following an exile, has returned with mainstreamized Trumpism. The non-function of Congress has led to increasing power in the executive branch, as the country transitions toward elective monarchy. Finally, the rise of Trump constitutes a moral revolution, expressing the true values of the United States. Fiat justitia e pereat mundus. Let there be justice though the world perish. If we review the above, we can come to a few recommendations for the United States going forward. First, while the American system is capable at creating wealth, excessive individualism and internal competition are creating increasing levels of suffering. The moral system should adapt away from individualism and closer toward an ethic of social solidarity, or being one's brother's keeper. While Americans reject redistribution, an alternative is to reduce the cost of housing, which is double the ideal. The Democratic donor class, who were one of the leading protagonists of the 21st century, need to go away. Finally, while impossible on a federal level, individual liberal states in the Union retain control over taxation and should implement policies to redistribute wealth and improve economic equality. What we are witnessing is not a coup, but a national revolution. Joseph Goebbels. The American political system can be viewed as a civil arena where different moralities compete for control over the country. In the post-Obama era, 3 different movements emerged: the class-based universalism of Sanders, the revolutionary conservatism of Trump, and the equity movement. After several electoral cycles, the American voter selected the winner of this process. Embracing celebrity as a virtue, it's transcended the civic ideals of Adams, Hamilton, and Jefferson, changing to a new politics of entertainment and showmanship. The ideal of the Roman Republic was that of a farmer rising to the highest office, a simple man coming to rule the republic. Ruling with civic virtue, his leadership of the state was followed by a humble retirement to his homestead. In Rome, this ideal was embodied in Cincinnatus and Sulla. When the founders created America, they sought the same ideal, and we see it expressed in George Washington and his voluntary step down from power. America, having elected a billionaire as president, shows its rejection of this ideal.